Tie in Chattanooga, Tennessee. David Tulis.
Charlena Michelle Cooks of Barstow, California, 8 months pregnant. And the fact that she told the officers that she was pregnant didn't matter. She was thrown to the ground because she refused to show identification, according to a story about Charlena Michelle Cook. There's a case being filed about her abuse. The officer admitted, "I don't see a crime that has been committed," and it's a dispute in a parking lot between two women. A very pregnant Cook tells the officer that this was all just a disagreement about the way she was driving in a parking lot. She explained that the woman was scaring her second grade daughter who was with her in the car. She called the police for whatever reason. I don't know. Cooks explained, "Should I feel threatened by her because she's white? Because she's white and she's making threats to me?" Well, that question is enough to set off the police officer. He demands identification from her, and he says, I actually do have the right to ask you for your name. Let me make sure," she replies, and she gets on the phone to verify this claim, and she's on the phone for 20 seconds and less. And when that time has passed, the officer and his partner take Mrs. Cooks down with a painful wrist lock. They slam her to the ground, belly first. "Why are you resisting? Why are you resisting?" The officers say that's the standard argument that, of course, if it's caught on camera. She says, "Please, I'm pregnant. Please stop this." It turns out that she is right. She had no obligation to identify herself since she had no crime had been committed by anybody, even by the officer's own admission. ACLU staff attorney Adriana Wong said it would be a wrongful arrest, but it would be an arrest. Even if an officer is conducting an investigation in California, unlike some other states, he can't just require a person to provide ID for no reason. Officers in California should not be using the obstruction law, Penal Code 148, to arrest someone for failing to provide an ID when they can't find any other reason to arrest that person. So in other words, the officer gives you a lawful order to show ID, right? And when you refuse, he arrests you for refusing to show your ID. But there has to be, in other words, an underlying crime that he has witnessed or that is being alleged. Jessica Price is another ACLU attorney. She says, "Imagine getting wrestled to the ground and handcuffed in front of your child's elementary school. Imagine interacting with other parents afterwards. Imagine what kids who saw the accident tell your child. And if you think the whole incident happened because of your race, how does that impact your view of police?" Cooks tells the Desert Dispatch that she's still trying to process everything and get in a good state of mind. "I'm in a very, very fearful state of mind. Barstow is so small, and I used to be comfortable living here. Not anymore. I really felt like after all that happened, I had some of my everyday freedoms taken from me. I don't think I've ever been that terrified in my life. I never saw that coming. I told him I was pregnant so he could proceed with caution. That didn't happen, and the first thing I thought was I didn't want to fall to the ground. I felt the pressure on my stomach from falling, and I was calling for help, but those guys are supposed to help me. But who is supposed to help me when they are attacking me?" A shocking video. This is David Tulis. And if you have the view, as most people do, that the state is responsible for security, you have to accept that kind of story. You just have to accept it. And there is it by the officer a proprietary claim. He has a claim upon you that no other person has. No other person in the free market would have that against you, but only the police do. A proprietary claim. That means a claim in which you are the property of the officer. And that whole training is a very extensive training for weeks with a lot of training in the use of force and compulsion makes officers think that you automatically are subject and that you better not challenge them, you better not doubt them, you better not defy them because that means you deserve to be taken down. This treating people as if they are trash is something that we see in another story out of Denver. And I'm looking at an account of it from Denver 7 Investigates TV station picked up by the freethoughtproject.com. And it deals with Victoria Ugalde, who was left in a holding cell for 13 hours chained to a toilet. They forgot about me, she said. I was looking in the camera. I was saying, can anybody help me? And then nobody. She was arrested, or she'd been arrested for a crime of failing to pay a traffic ticket. She'd been riding as a passenger in a car that was pulled over by a cop. She was taken into custody, told to remove her jacket, sweatshirt, and shoes before she was handcuffed to a bench in a holding cell. The only thing I wanted was someone to help me use the bathroom. Nobody was there, she said, noting that after 6 hours of being chained to a bench, she was in such excruciating pain that she managed to pull down her pants and urinate on the floor. The story deals with the officers. The initial one who was supposed to check on her every 30 minutes did not do that. And 4 officers who were supposed to check on Ugalde during the night went through their entire shifts and failed to do that. And she was so concerned about having gotten out of her handcuff that she put it back on. And then you could call that the Stockholm syndrome. Officer Sean Kelly failed to notice that she was there. He was reading a book called Emotional Intelligence 2.0. That's what the officer was reading, and received a very severe 3-day suspension, and others were given written reprimands. Another case just like it, a person in San Diego in 2012, a man smoking cannabis kept at a friend's house, kept in a holding cell for 5 days. He almost died of dehydration, near kidney failure, and a perforated lung from a suicide attempt, and not a single agent of the DEA was fired or indicted. And Victoria Ugalde, of course, is considering damages against the actions in terror against her. Now, you have to accept all this if you believe that the state has a duty, and that duty is security. I argue for a local economy perspective on this matter, and that is that the state has a duty to provide the court, and that's it. The expansion in our American past of government came through the use of our own ideas, and the ideas that we had was divide the power. And so thinkers who wanted an expanded role for government, especially the government of Washington, created the idea of a three-part state, legislative, executive, and judicial. And Colin, you're live on the David Tulis Show. What's on your mind? What can I do for you?
David, you know that we live under a tyrannical police state when a talk show host like Sean Hannity, who's about equivalent to Rush Limbaugh, is talking about the NSA, and him actually on the air saying we live in a police state, and a former NSA employee says, yeah, we are, and he's suing them. And this is proof positive of this, is that no one has the right, I don't care if they have a uniform or not, I don't care if they're the FBI or your local cop, that come up to you for no reason and demand identification. No one. And the Supreme Court has addressed this. Unless you're driving on the government's road with a government car, because remember, that car is not yours. It's titled in the state. You're nothing more than a mere slave in that vehicle. And until we look in the mirror and everyone says, I'm a slave, nothing changes. But to create the illusion that you're a free driver is absurd. You're a slave in the government's modes of transportation that you have an equitable interest in. But let's get back to this identification. Then you have to produce a government ID because you're a government crony. You're a sheep. It's like back in the slavery. You can't say to your slave master, I ain't going to be telling you who I am, Mr. Slave. You never come by here, Mr. Slave Master. I'm slave 47352. It's exactly the same now. If you're in a vehicle,
that's my use of the word proprietary.
You have to give them your slave identification, which is your national ID, which is your government driver's license. But if you don't have that and you're walking down the street, you're required to give no ID to no one, period. You have a right to remain silent. Can you ask me where you're going, Mr. Tulis? I don't even say. How'd you know my name? Well, I'm assuming that's you. You look like your picture. Is that you? I don't even say. Or what if you just decide not to speak? You're walking down the street and a cop comes up to you and says, can I ask you a question? And you don't say anything.
What about shaking your head?
Don't say anything. Don't even shake your head. Compel anyone to speak. And where does the law create a crime out of not doing something? You're being charged with not doing something. I thought you were only charged with a crime if you did something. I'll tell you what, and it's evidenced by the fact that now they want to put articles impeachment for Trump, for getting rid of Comey, and 40 years ago attacking an Alabama senator, because he will be a senator. We are at war. Listen, we have to get the mindset here. We are at war in this country. And the war is evil against good, localism against national and internationalism, Satan against God. These people in Washington, D.C. have the blood of Satan on them. It is a satanic town, and most people are engaged in satanic activity. They're devil worshippers. And I'll go as far as to say everyone with a driver's license is, in a sense, a devil worshiper. Because having that license comes under Health and Human Services Code 666. And if you don't believe me, look it up. But let's get back to our original point. You don't have to tell anybody who you are for any reason whatsoever unless you're in the government's motor vehicle, which is your car. But if you're driving down the street, walking down the street, you have no obligation to do that. Now, if a government passes statute saying you do, like in California, it's null and void on its face, because the Constitution supersedes every rule, regulation, ordinance, and statute. And the First Amendment guarantees you the right to speak or not speak.
The right to contract or not contract.
Right. So we need to get this clear and understand it's the tail wagging the dog here. It's God, man, government. That anyone that collects a check from the government is your employee, and they are bound by the rules and regulations of the Constitution. You're not.
Well, Mike,
I'm not bound by the Constitution.
Mike,
I think
you're living a bit of a fantasy when you suggest that a person on the government payroll is your employee. You're my listener's employee. That it doesn't work like that. The government is completely separate from the taxpayer and from the American. Now, the American has no claim upon him. The public servant is not employed by my listener. My listener is
that's
detached.
Totally wrong.
The listener is detached from that system.
Puts the claim on them. The Constitution definitely puts a claim, because they take an oath to obey the Constitution. You can't be a public servant unless you take an oath to obey the state and federal constitutions. And that's my claim on them. That is my claim. That gives me legal jurisdiction.
As a citizen, you're saying?
Well,
to call that state worker your worker.
The court will say state a claim upon which relief can be granted. Well, first of all, I'm going to claim that I have jurisdiction in this matter because they took an oath of the Constitution that I'm a party to, because I'm a citizen of this country, and they must obey the rules of that Constitution. That gives me claim.
All right, listen, Mike, thanks a lot.
You're not bound by the Constitution. You don't get paid by government.
The listener's not bound by the Constitution. Only state actors are.
Hiring private jails, not bound by the Constitution. Private police forces, not bound by the Constitution. Uber cops, not bound by the Constitution. It's the Wild West. They're only bound by their rules. That's why it's important that anyone that's in that position takes an oath to obey the Constitution, and they're bound by the rules of the Constitution, and they're restricted in what they can do and not do.
Well, listen, Mike, thanks very much for calling. I really appreciate your comments. I think, though, that for the listener to think that government employees work for him is a fantasy. The national government has completely separated itself. It is in fact outside the law, and it is a law unto itself. Though I think if there is an aggression by a state actor against my listener, Mike, he can assert that he is a free person. He just has to know how to maintain that status and how to defy false claims against him. This is David Tulis, and we are enjoying the 5th day today of cold flash dumping over the county and over the city this morning. Heavy activity in the sky. This is part of weather modification, the national government's control of the weather through the laying of plasma light cloud cover in giant swaths across different parts of the country. By schedule, we are making note of that schedule. It is the 5th day of November in which that is being done. Wanted to bring note to a story in the Times Free Press today about Unify Ed. And when I read news, I try to say, okay, why might this be important to you? And what is the main idea that seems to be in this accounting of a story that has a headline in the TFP, Unify Ed team to study community input on public school inequities. No, wait, that says, yeah, I was going to think he was saying inequities in Hamilton County. And it's really about, it's a story that you have this kind of account of efforts to make the system better because it's political, it's under statute, and it serves the state. It can't be better. It really can't be more customer or more family friendly. It's, in fact, innately hostile to the individual. and by definition, and it's hostile to the family, which had in the earlier times before mass factory schooling, it had authority and jurisdiction and a duty to train young people morally, ethically, and in trades and callings and literacy and numeracy as well. I think the key sentence in this piece, which is again administrative ways of bringing market or pseudo market or would be market pressures to bear to make the schools better, is this: Unify Ed's team will analyze the responses for the following 2 weeks and enlist the help of the steering committee to create a policy platform, which will be a collection of policies that would be adopted at varying levels of county government, school board, school system, or individual schools. The story is about the Apex project to create an action plan, by elevating community voice, quoting their Jonas Barriere, executive director of Unify Ed. So action plans, public input surveys, online version of surveys, community feedback, and that's what you have. If you don't have a marketplace where people make decisions because they're free, but you have a subject people, as Mike is saying, a subject people, you have to have this sort of pseudo market feedback mechanism. It is a pseudo market feedback mechanism. Even though free market actors use surveys, no doubt they use group studies and samplings to adjust their product or create a product or an innovation or to try out things. In an administrative realm, in the bureaucratic realm, that's all you have, right? You don't have a real marketplace. You don't have to serve a client who can leave. You have a captive audience, a captive clientele, because somebody else is paying their patronage, right? That patronage, of course, is the free schooling, the free education, as they call it. And what we don't have, is that story suggests, what we don't have is a real market. And so you have administrative solutions to what are called inequities. And who were once enslaved in the South, why are black people slaves still to the plantation mentality that keeps them in the public school? Maybe Joanne Favors, as she's not renewing her post in the General Assembly, might help work to free people whom she knows from this slavish mentality of being in the public schools, thinking that we have to improve them, thinking that we have to bring better feedback, make them more equitable. Wendell Berry has a great little essay, and I'm running out of time to quote from it, called Conserving Communities. And it's about, he proposes that the political situation is not between Republican and Democrat, liberal and conservative. It is, and this is my analysis, as well as I reminded myself checking his work out this morning, finding it in one of my giant stacks next to my very cluttered desk with a gigantic Macintosh screen in front of me where I do my page design and my other work. Several screens open at once, right? The legal and the cultural and the email all open at the same time. There is rather a national economy party and a local economy party. And you might say I'm a candidate for governor in the local economy party. The leaders of those parties are equally subservient to supranational corporations, he says, and he mentions NAFTA and GATT as proof of that. And he in this essay, he says that we've rejected the scale analysis, and we think that if you're bigger, you're better. He says the people from the global economy promoters believe that a farm or a forest is or ought to be the same as a factory, that care is only minimally necessary in the use of the land, that affection is not necessary at all, that for all practical purposes, a machine is as good as a human, that the industrial standards of production efficiency and profitability are the only standards that are necessary. Wendell Berry here, that the topsoil is lifeless and inert, that soil biology is safely replaceable by soil chemistry, that the nature or ecology of any given place is irrelevant to the use of it, that there is no value in human community or neighborhood, and that technological innovation will produce only benign results. The number is 800-8949, 800-8949. These people see nothing odd or difficult about unlimited economic growth or unlimited consumption in a limited world. They believe that knowledge is property, and is power, and that it ought to be. They believe that education is job training. They think that the summit of human achievement is a high-paying job that involves no work. Their public boast is that they're making a society in which everybody will be a winner, but their private aim has been to reduce radically the number of people who, by the measure of our historical ideals, might be thought successful. And that would be, now here's the short list: the independent, the self-employed, the owners of small businesses or small usable properties, those who work at home. And he says we've rejected the scale analysis. In other words, we see things that are gigantic, and we think that there is a salvation or a rescue in that large system, but it can't possibly function here in local economy. I argue for local economy and the free market. David Tulis, the blogger with the biggest pen, an open borders, classical liberal. David Tulis.
The Tennessee Valley's news talk leader.